It was going in and out. So I think everyone's here who was here just a moment ago. So thank you all for joining us today. We are really excited to have Jennifer Brockhoff, Director of HR, joining us today to talk about using the Clifton Strengths Finder in the classroom. So I'm really interested to hear more about this. I know that when we onboard, we all get to take this and kind of refer to it, but I think it's kind of interesting to hear, how we could actually utilize this beyond just, being aware of what our strengths and our colleagues' strengths are, but actually using it with our students as well. So I guess, Donna, if mine says pause, if you want to go ahead and record, or if I need to hit record, I can, and then you can take it away. Jen, I can monitor the chat. How do you want to take questions? Do you want everyone to hold questions to the end, or what would be your preference?
I think if you just monitor the chat and then we can just break in the moment and take the question, I think that works great. I know for me, I still have COVID brain, so to think that I'd have to wait till the end, I don't think I'd ever remember my question. So,
okay. Sounds good. So you can, if you have a question, want to chime in, or if you want to drop it in the chat, I'll keep a check on that, and we'll just try to take care of those as we go. And this is being recorded. So I think we are good to go.
Okay. Thank you very much. I was extremely flattered to be asked to speak with you today about strengths. Not only was I flattered, but I was telling some folks in the break room, I was really energized because of COVID. I haven't been able to do as much work with strengths as I have prior to COVID. So it felt like it was getting back to normal a little bit. It's something that really energizes me. And I think it is something that could be helpful in the classroom. I see a couple of people who I know Dr. Deck is using it in her classroom. And also Patty Spur attended a 2-day certification class that we held several years ago. And I know that she was extremely interested in strengths also. So just to give you a little history, in 2016, Rick Hudson was the Dean of Students at that time, and he had been introduced to strengths. And he thought it was really cool. And he came to me. And at first I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I started looking into it. And I was like, this is a really cool engagement tool. It's simple. The assessment's pretty straightforward. The information you get is pretty straightforward and simple. But when you start talking about it, there's a lot of complexities that you can go into it also. So I just thought it was a great tool for our organization. I picked up the ball to work with faculty and staff using strengths, and Rick put it in the Dean of Students office to work with the students. I know the students, if you can see this, the freshman students use this as a textbook in their freshman class. I don't know what the process is for a student to get the assessment if they don't come in as freshmen. So Yolanda Peterson is the person who is in charge of sending out the assessments. She also can put together team talent maps, which we'll talk about at the very end. So I haven't been involved a lot in using the classroom. Typically, if a faculty member has had exposure to strength and likes it, they'll start just using it on their own. It is something that I would be very interested in maybe standardizing at least the process, how you would get the information when you have a new class. So that might be something we need to take offline if enough people are interested, and talk about it later. Also, an hour isn't a lot of time. So this is just an overview, but I'm always available to have one-on-one meetings or small group meetings if anybody on this call wants to explore it further and kind of noodles through some ideas. I would love to participate in that. So my strengths are strategic learner, arranger, self-assurance, which is the one that gets me in trouble, and maximizer. I'm going to start from the basics just for those who aren't familiar with strengths. And then we can, then we can talk about how to use it in the classroom towards the end. But what is a strength-based approach? So one thing that I was really, really nervous about when we brought it to the institution is that I never liked anybody to feel like they're sized up or boxed in by any of these assessments. And that was a really big concern of mine. And so as I learned about strengths, what I thought was so cool, and I think this will really speak to your students, because I know that all people, especially young people, like to know that they're unique and special, and they're just not grouped into a category. So there are 397, 20 possible theme combinations. And then only 1 in 256,000 people share your top 5 themes. And then 1 in 33.39 million people share your top same themes in the same order. So just because you have communication and you can talk to somebody about your communication and have similarities, because you have 4 other strengths in your assessments, that all of these strengths are going to play off each other. It's a very, very unique assessment.
Jennifer, I have a quick question.
Yes.
There's some chat. So I know you mentioned like the freshman students. Do graduate students like coming in their first year in graduate program also automatically get it, or do we need to ask?
No, and not to my knowledge. And so right now, the process would be if there was a faculty member who wanted their students to go through it, they can get the assessment through Yolanda Peterson. I actually think it would be a great introduction for all graduate students as kind of just a welcome to Spalding, and here's some things you need to know, and here's an assessment, because I do think it sends such a good message that we're engaging them in this way and giving them a tool for self-reflection as they go through their graduate studies. I know I received my master's degree in 2020, and strengths was very, very helpful to me as I progressed along my program. And really when I hit parts of struggle or just working towards my goal, I really used my strengths to help me tackle some of the challenges I had and really to motivate me. So I think it would be a great thing to do. That's something we could talk to Kurt about if you're interested. Again, I think for you all, I have a pretty standard, a new hire gets the strength assessment. I go over it during the Spalding experience. So I have a very processed way for staff. I do not have that for students, but I would be very excited to develop that. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. And it looks like Patty said that she contacts Yolanda and just sends a list of ID numbers. But I think it would be really nice for graduate students to kind of it be more of an automated process that they're able to access this for all incoming graduate students too. So,
and Stacy, I don't know if you're able to join in on the conversation, but I know Stacy uses it with her students. Stacy, can you share some of the ways that you're using it with your students?
Yes, I get to turn my microphone on there. I think I was the birds earlier, so I did. Yeah, now I'm using it at the undergraduate level, and I'm trying to remember back because I did used to teach at the graduate level, and I think we've used it there, but I don't remember my direct experience. I found it very easy to just email Yolanda, like Patty said in the chat, the names of each of the students in my class. She sends me back separate access codes for each. She can either generate the email with that access code to the students, or I can take that and send an email from my end to them. I've found with experience that it can be helpful for me to generate that email so that if they have questions about the purpose and so on, they can come back to me with that. Just be aware that the standardized email that she sends tells them they have a certain amount of time and then the access code will expire. Between us, it doesn't expire. So you may or may not want to include that in there. It can motivate them to get it done, but it can also make them think that they could no longer do it if they haven't met that standard. What else can I say? It may be helpful to also ask if anyone has already completed the assessment elsewhere, because that can save us access codes and it can make it simpler for them to interpret their results. They need to know that if they can't remember, they can go back to their dashboard, and there is a way if they've forgotten their username and password to get that regenerated.
And you know what I would love to get to the point, and I know somebody's going to kill me in this process, but I would love when you get your class lists to have that strength right there with your class lists. So if we could somehow do it on the front end with students, and then when you get your class list, have that generated, I think that would be really cool. But again, processes is a whole other meeting for another time. So one of the questions in strengths that we asked ourselves is, what do you think is more useful? Knowing what your weaknesses are and attempting to improve or improve upon them or fix them, or knowing what your strengths are and attempting to build upon them and grow them. And I don't know if it just follows with my natural values, or what I see helpful working years and years with employees on their development or in helping correct developmental areas. But I think that using the best of yourself and maybe leaning it into a different way is better than trying to come up with a whole new way of being that you've never been in your life before. And so again, this is why strengths really speaks to me. Albert Einstein, no, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And so one of the things, the story that I tell that really sealed the deal to me on strength was a story that they told about, and if you've been in a strength session with me, you've heard this before, so I apologize, but it's about when your child comes home with a report card and you see they got all A's and they have a C in math. And as parents, and this almost brings me to tears because I was so that parent, what we automatically do is we're like, oh my gosh, you are capable of getting an A, you know, digging into, you must not be spending enough time, you must be not trying. We're going to get you a tutor so you can bring that C in math up to an A. And the real paradigm shift is, what if you said, good for you, you got a C, you passed math, which isn't really your favorite, but look at, you got that A in writing. What if we got a tutor for that in writing? Because you've already shown that you have a talent here and a strength here. And what could you really do with that? What could you be when you grow up with that? And it was such, as a parent, it was such a defining moment for me. And I think we do it as a society, is spending so much time on our weaknesses and not enough on our strengths. And if we did that, really, where could we be and how much more fulfilled and successful could people be? So just some of the impact when you take a strength-based approach in the workplace. It increases employee engagement and productivity when you allow employees to lean in to their own strength to get the work done and not everybody doing it the same. It really leads to job satisfaction and performance. Education improves attendance, grades, enthusiasm, able to see more option, and really promotes that resilience, which I think is so important for our students to really cultivate. And in relationship, it builds trust, optimizes collaboration, minimizes, oh, sorry, I didn't change it here, minimizes unprotective conflict. So I do a lot of conflict resolution here at Spalding. And one of the first things I do is I will pull up somebody's strengths. And oftentimes, more often than not, what I see is that the two people in conflict have completely different strengths, which means the way they're looking at that problem or situation or a relationship is a completely different lens than the other person. And that's very important to bring to the surface and talk about intentionally of how we see really things different and why that is. Okay, I'm having a little bit trouble with my notes and my presentation, so bear with me. So strength begins with talents, and that's what the assessment is doing, is it is identifying your top 5 talents. And they describe us, they influence our choices, they direct our actions, explain why we're better at some things than other, and they're really our filter for the world. So you get this assessment with your top 5 talents. Now they can just sit there as a point of information. You can be a little self-reflective and you can put it to the side. It actually has shown when you do that, you do get some benefit by just giving somebody an assessment and showing them that you're invested in them has some benefits, but it's pretty limiting. So if we take these talents that we have identified, and we take some time to really invest in them and work in them, that's where you gain control of them. That's when they become strengths. And I talk about if we all had superpowers. So if I was able to burst something into flames just naturally, without really being invested in taking the time to understand it, I could just be getting mad or bursting things into flame all over the place and causing chaos. Now, if I really embrace that and learned how to identify when it shows up, learn to use it intentionally, then if I'm walking on the street and there's somebody who's homeless and cold and there's maybe a trash barrel, maybe I can make a fire in that trash barrel to keep them warm and really do something intentional and good with that. So there's a process that that's called Name It, Claim It, and Aim It, that everybody has to go through to really kind of embrace their strengths. So in Name It, you take the Gallup Strength Finder assessment, you know your top 5 themes and know what they mean. And then we move over to the Claim It. And that's where you really start, I call it a call out, where you really start to see where they're popping up in your everyday life. And it gets to the point where you can kind of announce your talents before they announce you. So a lot of times we use this on the leadership team. Tori will stop somebody and say, my context is really kind of on fire right now and needing to be fulfilled. So if we can go back a little bit and talk about where this situation stemmed from, give me more understanding of it, it really helps other people understand, oh, that this is something that she needs to really be able to listen and move forward. And then aim it. And that's when you point your strengths towards your goal. And I do a lot of goal coaching, one-on-one coaching here, where I'll meet with, and primarily I meet with staff, but they'll say, I really am trying to meet this goal. And we'll go through each of their strengths and we'll kind of unpack them and see how their strengths can be used to reach their goals, maybe how a combination of strengths can be used to reach their goals. If I'm going too fast, let me know. I'm really trying to get through some of this background work so we can get to talking about how we can use it in the classroom. So how can Clifton Strengths help students thrive? It really is a great self-awareness tool. It's really a tool where they can kind of kick back and really look at what motivates them, what challenges them. It also can help with teams, and we're going to I put together a team talent map so you can see how that works that we'll talk about towards the end. And it really deepens their engagement in the classroom. Again, anytime that you can take a student and take them out of the group and make them an individual and show them how they're unique and different, I think that really helps with their engagement in the overall class. And I know you all do that in a plethora of other ways. This is just another tool to help with that. So before this session, I believe Donna and or Lisa sent out the brief descriptions of each of the strengths, so you would have those. So those are just shown here. It's funny because one thing to remember is themes are neutral. There's no good ones and no bad ones. And that's a really hard thing because you got to remember these are all Webster dictionary words. And it's just a quick word to give you an overall understanding of what that talent is. And some of those words sometimes might land on us a little negatively. Like sometimes people think significance. Well, that sounds very narcissistic, or and it really isn't. It's just somebody who likes to be recognized for the work they do. That's what motivates them. It doesn't have to be anything big. It can be like a thank you note or just high five, but that's something that really motivates them to go on the next project. So you have to be careful and make sure that you're not taking maybe your own understanding of the word and categorize them into good or bad. Strengths are not what you do, but how you do it. And each theme has unique needs and contributions. I did not send this along, but I will follow up and send it to the group. But this is, I think, would be particularly interesting as you get to know and you're working with your students in the class. I always say that strengths can be a little window into someone's being. Every time that I have a meeting with someone, we have everybody's strengths on our directory. And so if I haven't met them before, I'd like to click on their strengths and just get an idea of where they're coming from. Or sometimes if I'm working with somebody and I'm having a little bit of, I feel like we're having an interpersonal block or a communication block, I'll look at their strengths. I'll give you one quick example of that. I am very much an executor. So I don't lead with a lot of conversation. Typically what I do in meetings and in relationship is I jump into the work. A lot of my friends are people I've worked with because that's where I'm really comfortable getting to know somebody. Through that work, I'll move from more of an executing domain more into a relationship, but I don't lead with it. So there was a person on campus who every time I worked with them, I just felt a block. I felt a resistance and that I just couldn't overcome. So I looked up their strength on the directory and they were all relationship. So here is somebody who establishing some sort of connection on a relationship basis is really important for them to be motivated and invested. And here I come in like a bull in a china shop, just jumping in and doing the work. And so do you see how those things buck up against each other? Well, that was something I could, once I realized that, I could very easily adjust. So I made sure when I came into meetings that I asked about their day, I got to know their kids' names. I connected with them on a relationship basis. I made sure that I made time to go out to lunch and get away from the office. This is before COVID, but get away from the office with them. And I can't tell you how much our just making those slight adjustments improved our relationship. And this was somebody, it was very important. I worked with them all the time that we have a good relationship. And so that's just one way that when you're hitting a wall with someone, that strengths can really be a good tool. This sheet also, this bring and need, is very helpful also, because it tells, it's just a quick, one-liner, just keyword sheet of what someone brings to a situation, to a relationship, to a team, but also what they need from you. And I think this is really important. And again, you've all been doing this a long time. You're all great at being educators. And this is just another tool when you're working with the students to get a little bit of insight on, what makes them tick, how they work. Does anybody have any questions up to this point?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So you mentioned looking up the a colleague's strengths on the directory. Is it possible? Can you maybe send that link to either me or Dono afterwards so that we could pass that along too? I'm not familiar with how to access that.
Okay, so let me see. I might be able to show you. Oh, I don't want to mess myself up here. Hold on. Let me see if I can. Hold on 1 second and I will show you. Let me get in. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. Let's see, let me move this down. Okay, so real quickly, if you get into, and Ezra has done a really good job on this for me also. If you go into your portal, can everybody see the portal on the screen? I'll take that as yes. Yeah. And go under quick links into campus directory. You will see everybody's name. And then if you go and click, you will see all their information, plus you will see their top 5 strengths. And if you hover over the strength, it gives you a little paragraph about the strength. So it's really cool. Like I said, it's really, really cool. So, and we're going to talk about the domains in a minute. But Jill Gaines, achiever, relator, strategy, responsibility, and futuristic. So in a nutshell, I can tell you that when you meet with Jill, she is going to be your strategy woman. She's very talented in this area. She's very motivated by the strategy. And so when you're meeting with her for the first time, if you're starting with the task and maybe not connecting it to the overall strategy, your connection with her may take a longer period of time. And so if you have an ask of her, starting off, what this tells me is starting off with the strategy is a really good way to get her engaged quickly. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
So it's just a neat tool. Now I'm going to try to get back to my presentation. Okay, great. Let me pull this up here. Okay. Any other questions? So again, the last part is claiming it, and it's really kind of owning your strengths, using them actively, seeing if you can bring them forward. So a lot of times I'll be meeting with my team and somebody on my team will say, Jennifer, I would love to do that part of the project. I think that getting everything, the process organized and getting all the pieces together really speaks to my arranger. And I think I would be really good at that. And I really appreciate people calling out their own strengths and helping me, because there's always enough work for everybody. But instead of getting somebody stuck with the pieces of the work that they don't like, it's really great if someone can say, that really takes advantage of my strengths, or I could really lean into my strengths to do a good job with that. And it's really helpful. And that's part of that claiming it. I want to go to basements and balconies. people are very interested in this. And so remember before we talked about, concentrating on your weaknesses and how unproductive this is. Well, one of the things about your top 5 strengths is when they're good, they can be so good for you. But just like anything else, there's a yin and a yang. And so your strengths, when you're, and I like to use the words tired, sick, or hungry, they can be something that's very powerful for the good, or they can be something that's very powerful for the negative. And so let me use one of my own. I'm going to go to maximizer. So maximizer, when I'm well fed and have had a workout, it really helps me work on something to make it the best, to take something that's good and bring it to the next level and make it something really special. But when I'm tired, sick, or hungry, and my team can attest to this, I get really picky. I send things back for revisions over and over. It's never good enough. And so I have to be very, very conscious of that. Because not only is that demotivating for me, but that's going to be demotivating for everybody around me who I'm involved with. And so part of that claiming it is really to do some self-reflection and say, when has this strength really bode well for me? And when I'm tired, sick, or hungry, when can this strength really be a negative for both myself and the folks I'm working with? And you may see that in your students also. When you start getting familiar with their strengths, you might be able to tell, like, oh, did you not get enough sleep last night? Or, if somebody who has self-assurance is really usually a leader in the class and people really enjoy being with them and look to them. If they're not in a good place, it could very much turn as overconfident, stubborn, or arrogant. And how do you toggle back to the more positive side of that strength? Any questions on balconies and basements? This next slide is just some questions that help you kind of unpack those. The other thing is to remember is because, remember, 1 in 33.29 million people have the same strength as you. The reason that's so important is because they don't stand alone, is they work together, and they can work together in yourself, or they can work together with other people. So if any of you have worked with Emily Norris and I, you know that though we get along very well, we are very, very different, and our strengths couldn't be more different. But we've worked really hard to combine our strengths and work together for the better of the university. And so, so you can, again, use these things, partnership within yourself or within or with other people. And this is really cool when you do team projects with classes. And if you're deciding what students should pair up together, sometimes it's not just the students who will have the same perspective, but people who will have different perspective and a different lens that they're looking through things to help challenge each other. Oops, sorry, I went crazy. So each strength, you can see that they're color coded, has a domain. And so here you will see that when I was talking about executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking, this I feel you would use more in the classroom. I know that this you make one-on-one time for your students, so understanding their strength is important, but also as the students as a whole. And so, and where they fall on this might be how you another tool you use when you're planning your class. So executing, these people really know how to make things happen. They get annoyed with long meetings. They want to start working on things. They make relationships while doing the work. And those are your achiever, arranger, belief, consistency, deliberative, discipline, focus, responsibility, and restorative. Influencing, and as you go through this, I want you to maybe guess of the students in your class who fall into these domains. They know how to take charge and speak up. They make sure the team is heard. This group wants to change and alter feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Mentoring and coaching opportunities help build relationship with these folks. And those are your activators, command, competition, maximizer, self-assurance, significance, and woo. And so think about what it looks like, what the world looks like when you're in one of these domains, and how each of these domains might make the world look a little different, or take how you approach things a little different. Relationship building, people with this domain have the ability to build strong relationships and they're really the glue that holds the team together. Many times their friend groups are made up with people they work or volunteer with. They like to work in groups. Adaptability, connectiveness, developer, empathy, harmony, includer, individualization, positivity, and relator. And the next, strategic thinking. They help teams consider what they could be. They absorb and analyze information to make better decisions. They're constantly processing in their heads and internally. This is so interesting in this because they can break down into two groups, really creative and then more of the critical thinkers. Creatives are futuristic, ideation, intellection, learning. They like to take ideas and multiply it, creating new ideas. And then more of the critical side where they're analytical, input, context, strategic. They like to take ideas and break it down into pieces. So you might find somebody's top 5 may be in all of these domains. Sometimes people squarely end up in one of these domains. Sometimes people will be in 2. And so now we're at the aim it phase, and this is perfect because I wanted to leave about 15 minutes. And this is really where you're going to point your strengths towards your goal and then use them intentionally and purposely to reach those goals. For you, I think this tool, which we call the team talent map, but it could be a class map, could be a really cool piece of information, not only with your students' individual strengths, but just to see the makeup of your class. So I know a lot of you, this is an introduction to strengths, and I went at light speed, so you're still probably processing a lot of information. For those of you who've had more use with strengths, this might be a more of an appropriate time to talk about the team talent map. But if you had a class, and this is the team talent map I gave you, can people just make out some call outs, some observations about what they see in this particular class?
There's a lot of people in the relationship building domain.
And how do you think that would play out in a class? Or what would this class need?
Well, sometimes if people are very relationship focused, they don't necessarily move forward on the task. So they would need some, balance to keep them moving forward on the task, as well as, building relationships with each other.
That's a good call out.
I have seen exactly this kind of a relationship with classes of social work students, where there's a lot of relationship building, which is a natural strength in our field. And this kind of lack of talents in the influencing area, which, as I understand it, is not uncommon generally, but it's a really important thing to notice for social workers who aim to be change agents. You've got a whole cohort that doesn't have, top 5 strengths in that area. They might want to think as a group about how to encourage and enhance that in one another. Or how do you
that's such a good call
to
out.
achieve that goal?
Yeah, that's such a good call out, because here's the thing with strengths is, again, it is not to box you in. So I think and Stacey, I think we've had this conversation with your classes before. So if you're based in relationship, one of the questions, and I do this a lot in my coaching, is your strength doesn't always have to stay in that domain. And what I mean by that is, how can you lean into a relationship strength differently to influence? And really kind of that's the question to kind of ponder is, how can I take, so let me give you an example. So as somebody who looks at somebody as an individual, how can I use that knowledge? How can I use that insight to influence people? And it might just be talking about what you know and talking about it in a passionate way. I think for me, when someone comes to me with an idea or with an idea, nothing gets me on board quicker than somebody's passion to do something. And so, one of the things that you might talk about in the class is there's a lot of folks here who have a natural relationship. How are we going to use that to, as Donna said, get things done? How are we not going to stay in our domain, and how are we going to use that? So if you're in a group project and you have relationship, maybe it's that empathy that this class is, really important to the individual in your group, that maybe this is their last class, or that maybe that they're struggling with this grade and that project's really important. How can you lean into that strength in a different way to get things done, to motivate you? Because our strengths are really what motivates us. So I'm sure Stacey sees, when you're digging into more of the relationship part of the class, how there's a lot of energy, and maybe as you move into other things, how some of that energy wanes. Do you ever see that, Stacey?
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about how to reframe this. Influencing at its worst is getting other people to do what we want them to do, and it at its best is finding common ground and getting them to do what they want to do.
Right.
So I think that really could lean into those relationship talents to achieve the goal that you think is influencing, but actually is going to be probably more effective to go through relationship.
Absolutely. So let's try to do a real working example. Y'all going to make some pairings. So you're going to have 2 students work together on a project. What are some of the students that you would put together, and why, looking at this this team talent map?
I think I might put together Booker and Alaya, because it seems to me that Booker, and I would probably, if he was on a team, I would want to talk with them about, he's someone, who likes apparently to take time thinking. I know, because I have a lot of his strengths as well. Somebody who likes to take time thinking and, gathering input and all of that. And so he may have difficulty on a team that's, very heavy relationship building. So making sure that he remains involved will be important. But I think Alaya has a real, it seems like their top skill is kind of moving forward, getting things done, achieving. So even though the 2 of them would be perhaps opposite in some ways, I think that together, if they could both lean into their strengths, they might make a very effective team.
And I think as you go through that, and I wasn't even thinking of this till this minute, but think of how that justification, how if you could verbalize that to the students, how they, saying, I put you together because I see this, and them knowing their own strength. And then you saying, I really think you could benefit each other in this way. To me, that's really an exciting way to start a project, is to start with this groundwork. Do you see, is that resonating with anybody? To be maybe saying the why, this is why I put you two together. I really think you can feed each other, off of each other or motivate each other.
I think that is really effective, especially because I teach a small group communication class, and I think we naturally tend to gravitate toward people who have similar outlook and perspective as we do. And oftentimes students will get really frustrated if they do have a partner or others in their group who are not really similar to them, evidently really, similar to them in the way they approach the work. And so I think explaining that up front really would help them in a lot of ways.
And that reminds me too, when I'm working with conflict resolution, sometimes I see people who are opposite, which seems, kind of what it would be. But sometimes I see people who are exactly the same, and they're butting heads. And I'm sure you've all, seen that, where two people are so much alike that sometimes they butt heads in that, because there's not a yin to the yang. So that can be really interesting too. Sometimes if you bring two relationship people in, if they see the relationship different, then that could, cause some problems. Or two people who are high in executing, if they see that there's different paths and they want to take different paths, that can cause conflict also.
Yeah, good point.
Does anybody else want to take a stab at pairing up two or three people and saying why? I don't know if this is the part I'm supposed to call on people, but I'm not comfortable with that. So, this is something that you could just reflect on. Again, I'm always available. If you put something together like this for your class and you wanted to, look, have a cup of coffee and look over it, or come to my office and look over it. And, a lot of times, sometimes if a class isn't gelling, we could look at this together and maybe look out for some possible root causes.
I think also one thing that we're guilty of is putting students in group projects without giving them any scaffolding for how to work effectively. So even if they're forming their own groups, it would be interesting for them to have this and talk about it at their first meeting and think about how it applies. Because what I notice is all the achievers want to be in the same group. And that's not necessarily a good idea. But if achievers are in groups with others, they tend to get frustrated with the people who sit back and think things through more slowly, or don't have that urgency for, getting things done in advance. So really thinking about what their role is and where people might misunderstand them as well.
Right. And I think this is such a good thing for just appreciating other people, right? Just understanding, it's not always my way or the highway, that there's different ways of approaching it, that people can take different paths and both be successful. And being okay with that. And so again, and most people can very easily adjust. If we talk about the example I gave you, even though I'm not in relationship, I don't think I have a relationship. I think it's 13 or 14 before I had a relationship strength. But I can lean into my strengths in another way, or I can be respectful that that's where someone is coming from also. So in the last 5 minutes, does anybody have any questions? Do you want me to go over anything that maybe I blew through too fast?
Well, I guess my question would be, and I don't know, Stacy, if you have any advice on this as well, but I really like this idea. But I could also imagine, if you have a large class, this could be a little bit time consuming. So
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's still not worth doing. I don't know. I mean, what have you seen people do who do use this in the class? Like, do they actually go through and look at this for pairing and making groups, or is it a better idea to maybe let the students see this and then kind of help guide them in making their own groups? I don't know if you have a suggestion or other ways to use that.
I think either or. I personally have not used it to form groups, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea either. I'm sitting here thinking, why haven't I done that? I do think it's a nice tool to use as a new cohort is forming. I also use it toward graduation for identification of strengths as students are putting together resumes and preparing for interviews and looking at jobs that are a good fit for them. So I sort of bookend my program with it. But I think there are lots of ways it could be used in between as well.
And the resumes is a great, so and I worked with Stacy on this too. Resumes is a great place to pull out that your report and use that, take that language from the report and put it right into your resume as far as, strengths and things you do well. And also, preparing for interviews and that type of thing. I think for me, this evolves. So I think this would just be a cool tool to just have. You get that class, you get their strengths in this team talent map is, once all the kids are registered, we find a way that each class you have a team talent map and you just look it over. And then as the class goes on, especially in a big class, because Lisa, that's a good call out. This is a lot of work. It's a lot of individual work. And, in a 60 session, you're already challenged enough. But I think that just having a little insight, and then if you see that Brianna was really a star student the first couple weeks, and then something has happened, maybe, look at this and see, Brianna's heavy in relationships. Is there something that may be going on personally that's affecting it? Because being heavy in relationship, that might be harder for her to put aside than somebody else. Again, they just kind of just windows into somebody's, how they're motivated. And I think it's kind of, I would like it just to see, what am I starting out with here? What does this class look like? Are they going to be really excited to get into the work and get into the project? Are they really going to want to focus on, more of the intellectual parts, more of the history parts and the strategic thinking? In student groups, you might have all these kids in a student groups and you don't have any influencing. How are you going to lean into your strengths in different ways? So I think it's just kind of a nice landscape of the class you have in front of you, given that you might not have worked with these students before.
This is Patty. I don't do this at all. I don't ever do the map of the class. I actually have an assignment where after they get their strengths, they go through and say, did I have questions that ask them to reflect on, how do you think this is your strength? Does this surprise you? And then I have them talk to family members to talk about their strengths. And it's always real positive, because then the family members really tell them positive things about themselves that they normally never say. And
I love that.
And then I think I have another piece. I was trying to pull up the assignment and I couldn't pull it up real quickly, but it's several parts related to self-reflection and them identifying and how can they use this. And I hope is to then I need to expand it into other courses as to how can I pull in strengths in other courses besides just the leadership class.
Patty, is your experience, do you feel there's an appreciation that you take time to get to know the students in this way?
I never put it together.
Mhm.
You know, so I can't say.
It
yay
starts
or
you, it
nay.
sounds like it starts you off on a good foot though, for
It's
sure.
really more of a personal exploration for them,
Mhm.
and they look at the definitions and what they are, you know, which ones they thought they would have been,
Mhm.
and I want to add um, the old basement
The balcony basement.
balcony. I almost called it ceiling. But so I have some other things I'd like to expand to it, but so far, I think it seems pretty good.
Great, thank you. Well, we are at 12:31, and so I'm sure you have another meeting or a lunch or, but again, I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk to anyone. And again, my door is always open. It's a nice break from some of the other tasks I have. So yeah, again, please reach out.
Great, thank you so much. And just to clarify, Donna was asking, you said we can reach out to Yolanda to
Yeah,
make one of these maps for our classes?
Uh-huh.
Am I correct?
yes.
Okay, good.
Yep, you just have to give her the name, the emails of the students, and then if she finds a student who hasn't taken the assessment, she'll let you know.
Okay,
Just as a quick note, I always put myself on the talent map as well.
Oh,
I
smart.
think it's helpful for them to feel like I'm going first so
Mhm.
that they feel comfortable about the process.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Smart.
And then I do have one other question. I know people probably need to jump off, but where you showed the example of like pairing two and how you were asking about pairing two here, did you say there is like a document that shows like ones that are good matches, or?
There's really not any bad matches. So remember, you know, where things go awry is when people are in their basements.
Yeah.
That's really kind of where things go awry with, you know, but so you can't, there's things that usually don't go together. You won't see very often. Maybe harmony and competition, or harmony and command, you might not always see together. So there's some that are just less common, but they're not, you know, again, there's not really anything bad. Sometimes it's how we are, how we're showing up with our strength that will end up positive or negative, if that makes sense.
On the other hand, it might be good to put those two together because they will help each other if they do it constructively to avoid their basements.
Right. Right. And I meant within the same person. Usually you won't see command and harmony in the
Yes.
same person. But again, it might be really good if you're working on, say, a project on compassion, that, you know, the command person has a harmony person with them to balance them out a little bit.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you again. And
Okay.
if you, like you mentioned that one other.
The bring your needs, I will send that after this meeting.
And we can send it out to everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. I think it's very interesting and something that we can all, you know, take advantage of using in our classes. So
Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Take care.
yeah, thanks. Have a great day.
Stay dry.
Yes.